All right, here we are, week 4. This is part 2 of our Intro to Programming for Business Majors, Java. This we're going to look at conditional print formatting. So let's go ahead and pop over to our slide deck and get going. All right, so there is a method called printf that's to our system, one we've already used, which is our system out where we used our print and our print line. Remember our print just prints whatever you got, print line prints, and then makes an enter or brings you to the next line. So printf is used to format console output. And general format method are print the string you want and argument list. So format string is the string that contains the text or special formatting specifiers. Arg list is optional. It is a list of additional arguments. They'll be formatted according to the format specifiers listed in the string. Here's a simple example. Print hello world, next line. Okay. Another example. I worked 40 hours. Now, see, I've got integers for hours, giving it 40. Now I have this F statement. Now notice what I got here. I got percentage sign D, hours. So what is this doing? And I have this is my argument next, hours. So hours we've assigned 40, so it's going to come out to 40. Because when it's, and the reason it's a D for percentage here is because we're looking for a number. If it was a string, we'd be using a different variable. So format specifier indicates a decimal integer will be printed. The contents of the hours variable were printed in the D format specifier. Okay, so that's what we're looking at. Another example, two integers, cats. We have D. Notice it's just both D and D, and it just catches them by the order you put them in. So if I change this and put cats up front and dogs, you'd get 4 and then 2. Okay, so that's what you're looking at, and so this is a printf, and what we've done is this percentage D tells you that when you go to print, I want to replace this with the first argument, and this is replaced with the second argument, and these arguments should be numbers. They should not be strings. Okay. Another example, gross pay is 12, my pay, now I have an F here. Okay. Notice I don't have a D anymore, I have an F. So F is a floating point. So where the D was our integer, which does not have a decimal, F is a floating point, which means you can have decimals behind it. Now, this is another example. I think somebody brought this up in class. How do I make sure, instead of getting this, because notice I just wrote 874.12 and I got all these zeros behind it. How do I stop those zeros from coming? Well, I use this, your pay. Now you see before the F, I have a .2, so my percentage .2. So what that says, I only want 2 decimal points after the decimal. That's all I want. And that'll give me my 87.12. Okay. So kind of review really fast. Let's go back here. So we've got D. D is, and we've got an integer. So that's where D comes from. We have another D with integers. Now we have an F. F is floating point, but notice F by itself will just kind of roll out with a bunch of zeros behind it. The point 2, so if I had made this point 1, I would have just gotten 81.1. If I made it 0.3, I would have gotten a 0 after that. And so keep that in mind. Format specifier indicates their floating point value to be printed rounded to 2 decimal places. This is actually rounding. Now keep in mind, so it's saying it's rounding. So if this number was 17, you would probably make, if I change this to a 1, that would make that a 2. Okay. So instead of, if I made this as a 1, my output would look like this. Let's go, I'll just find a line to write on here. My output would be 87.1 right now. Okay. But if this was 87.17, this would come out to be 87.2. Okay. It's rounding. Very important to keep in mind that's rounding, because when you are, if instead of that, if you force a decimal into an integer, like you cast it to an integer, the integer just cuts it off. The integer does not round. So even if this was 87.4.99, and if I just cut this off the integer, it would be 87.4. It would be 874. It would not do any kind of rounding. So just keep that in mind that this will round, moving something to an integer will not round it. Okay. Another format specifier you can put in is the comma. And this is used for, in America, typically, you don't see as much in Europe. This is how we separate our value. So you have a thousandth separator, then you have the millionth separator. So every three, digits, you're going to put a separator in front of it. And this is very much a common thing in America, not seen so much in Europe. In fact, most in Europe, they use the comma as your decimal point. Okay. Another example is a string. Now we have an S. So we've had, if we remember so far, we've had, I'm just going to write it here. We've had, that is for integers. We had the F's, which we can place things in front of F, like I want 0.2 decimals, F, and I can even put the comma in front if I want the commas. And now S is a string. So I'm passing a string to F. Let's undo what I just did there. So now we've got string. So we print out, and it should come out your name is Ringo, because we're passing the string Ringo to it. Now we can specify the width. And what this does, placing the 6 in front of the D, tells you I want 6 spaces before you present the value, which you get out here, which you get these weird spaces here. I guess there's some examples of that. You might want to do that, but I can't think of them off the top of my head. And you can do the same thing here. So the number in front gives you the spaces. The number behind gives you how many decimals you want. And you did see this does round up. So 97.68 does round to 97. The string format method works exactly like the system outprintf method, except it does not display the formatted string on the screen. Instead, it returns the reference to the formatted string. You can assign the reference variable, then use it later. So the string format method, general format method is string format, the formatted string, augmented lists. Okay, and all this does, so let's go and pop over here, this payroll dialog, revisit and see what this does. All right, so this one looks a bit like the one we had from last week when we were learning about these J option panes. So here we're importing the Javix swing option panes, so we're not using the scanner here. And we got a string name and an input string and an integer hours. Then we have a double, that's our pay rate, and a gross pay. Okay, so name equals J option page, what's your name? Input string, how many hours you work this week? Integer part, remember, everything coming through this J option is a string, so you have to parse as an integer if you want to turn the value you hand in to be a number you can work with. And the same thing, we're going to parse with a double. And again, go back to last week if you need to remember how to do this, but just keep in mind anything you input into one of these boxes, because if you remember, we're going to see it in a second, this is those input boxes that come up. Anything you input is being viewed as a string, so if you need to work it as something other than a string, you have to tell the program, hey, I need this to be an integer, or hey, I need this to be a double. Then we're doing a simple calculation here, and then we're going to show a message, and here's where the change is. We put in a string format. Your gross pay is string format, args gross pay. So it's just put inside here. Okay, so it's inside the actual message dialog out there, so it's part of the printout. And then remember, we have our system exit status 0, otherwise the program won't end. Let's go ahead. I'm going to highlight this whole thing. Let me pop over here. So I want to show you guys something. If you end up with a problem where this just isn't working, if you're having issues compiling and stuff, if I can get this to expand for you a little bit, is you can just go to here to your just build and clean, and that'll refresh whatever your project source is. So just keep in mind in case you have any issues. But we're not going to have any problem. We're going to run this, run the file. The only problem is this shows up on my wrong monitor. So anyway, it's going to ask, what's my name? And I say Ben. It's going to ask, how many hours I work this week? And I'm going to put in 40. if I put in a 40.5, it's going to fail, but I'm not going to fail it. And then my hourly pay. Now this is asking for a double, but I'm not going to put in an integer because it'll accept double will accept an integer. I'll say I have $50 an hour, and then it tells me, hey, my gross pay is $2,000 for this week, and I'll say okay, and that's the end of it. All right, but let's go ahead and try it again. I'm going to make sure that we get to see the formatting. So we're going to run the file one more time. My name's Ben. I worked 40 hours this week. Now let's say I make $50.125 an hour. So as you see, it comes out to, wow. It's funny, on my other screen, it showed, I can't get it to show here. When I brought it to the other screen, it actually showed the .00. You'll see it on your screen. It must be just a weird formatting thing, but it brought it to a double digit output out there. So, all right, that's it for this. I look forward to seeing you in the next class and work together in the labs. Again, thanks a lot.